What's up, everybody? This is Junior again. We've got a little leather working project we're going to be doing. We're going to be replacing this leather sheath that came with this Gransforsbruk Small Forestry Axe and replacing it with this custom model. So our first step is to trace out our pattern onto a manila folder using the existing sheath. We're going to need 2 sheets of manila folder because we're going to do this twice so that we'll have a pattern for both the sheath and the welt, which is basically just a spacer. So now I'm going to use the pattern that I just cut out to make another one for my welt spacer. Now here I am, I'm using the axe head as a guide to determine the width of the welt that I'm going to be using for this project. And so after double checking the fit one more time, I'm ready to cut out the welt. So now I'm going to cut out the last piece of this project, which is the strap for the snap. Again, I'm going to be using the original sheath as my guide. And also, I recommend using a straight edge in this process to kind of help make sure your lines are as clean and as straight as possible. I did use the ruler that you see next to it here as sort of as my guide to draw out my first lines, and you can lay it there and cut against it as well as if you need it. So now I'm ready to go ahead and transfer the main body of the sheath pattern over to the leather, start cutting that out as well. So this is the part where I use a straight edge to make a slight score line, and I'm going to use a scoring tool to carve out a little line to make this project, the leather piece, where it'll fold a little easier. So now just checking with the axe head itself, just to make sure it folds around it good and that I've got to have a decent amount of space for my welt. If I feel like I'm off in my pattern, I can always go back and start over, but this looks pretty good. So now that I'm happy with the way the main body came out, I'm going to go ahead and cut out my welt spacer and get started on that, fitting it up, and I can make any adjustments if I need to. Now I'll use my edging tool to round off the edges of the cutout pieces. I recommend this because it's really going to make your project look a lot more professional. I recommend using the edging tool even on the back sides of your projects to really give it a good, clean, professional look. So this tool here is called a stitch groover, and what it does is it makes a cutout area a groove so that your stitches will sit below the leather surface, and what it does, and that protects it over the long term, keep your stitches from rubbing off on things. But here I'm just using it as a decorative line to kind of define the outer edges. I just like the way it looks. So now I'm going to use the same stitch groover to sort of outline around the edges of the main body of the sheath. Inside that is where I'm going to put my basket weave pattern. So that's just kind of like, I'm basically just making a frame on the sheath to define where I'm going to put that pattern. So now I'm going to be prepping the leather with water for a tooling in a process called casing, which is basically just soaking the leather in water and letting it dry out slightly over time, usually about 24 hours. You want the leather damp, but you don't want it soaked. You can always add more water with a sponge as you go. So just wrap it in a plastic bag, but not a fully sealed bag like a Ziploc bag, or it's not going to dry properly. You can store it in the fridge for a few days if you're not going to be tooling right away. That way you don't get mold on it. So just wipe off the excess and wrap it in your plastic bag. Just any kind of grocery bag or storage bag will work. Again, you want it to dry out slightly and slowly, but not completely. So this is two pieces of leather here. One is a dried piece of leather that has not been cased yet, and then the other is one that has been casing over the course of the last 24 hours. So you can see the difference there. The one that's been cased it's damp and ready for tooling, but it's not completely soaked. Now I'm going to prep the surface of this piece of granite block. What this will do is when the leather is damp, it's very susceptible to abrasion and getting marks and divots and dents in it. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that everything you touch the leather to from here on out is completely smooth, so that you won't hurt the leather in any way. So before I start tooling, I'm going to make sure that my surface is completely free of any objects. So now that my surface is clean, I'm ready to start the tooling. I've got a basket weaver, I've got a backgrounder, and then I've also got a seating tool that I'm going to use, along with a light rawhide hammer. Starting off with my basket weaving, I'm going to make a guideline that's going to determine what direction that this basket weave pattern is going to go. Some people do it at an angle, but this one I'm just going to be doing straight down the middle. And I'm lining up my tool with the guideline, and I'm starting my line. This will be where I start from. So using the first line as my guide, I sort of alternate the strikes going the next direction. And this one I kind of messed up. I got my first one a little bit too close to the first one. You want to kind of alternate these so it looks like a more authentic basket weave. Also, one thing you want to point out is you don't have to go all the way up to the line that we determined, because what we're going to do is we're going to go back with another surfacing tool to go along and outline those edges so that it sort of blends into the line rather than drop off abruptly. And this is the finished basket weave pattern, and you can see that I've outlined the edges with another surfacing tool. So now what I'm going to be doing, just to kind of set it off a little bit more, one thing I like to do is I like to use this little cedar to go along, and it just adds a little texture, a little bit more depth to it, and sort of helps to outline the project a little bit better. You can see what it looks like when you've gone all the way around. And since this axe sheath is from my dad and his axe, I'm gonna basically personalize it a little bit by putting his name on it. So now that we've got all the patterns on this thing, it's time to start kind of putting it together. So to attach the strap, I'm gonna mark a spot on here, and I'm gonna use my punch tool to get a hole for the rivet that's gonna hold these two pieces together. So I've chosen a rivet. So now I'll use the anvil and the stamping tool and the two-piece rivet system, and I'll just attach the strap to the main body of this sheath. So this sheath has a strap that has a snap that will hold the whole axe in the sheath when it's not in use. Snaps can be a little bit tricky, so make sure you have some extra ones, because you might want to do a little trial and error. You might want to do a little practice on some scrap pieces of leather. But it's all about alignment and making sure you use the proper tools, and make sure that you get it in there and that you press it in correctly. So I'd used the hole on the strap to make my mark on the main body, so to get it all lined up correctly. There's literally a ton of videos on YouTube that show you how to put on snaps and rivets and things like that, so I won't go all into that, but I recommend that you look some of them up so that you make sure you get the proper tools, take some time to practice on some scrap pieces as well. So now I'm marking a spot for my rivets for this. If I'm doing a lot of threading, I like to use my drill press because it makes a lot of, it's more accurate. But in this case, I'm just putting in 4 rivets, so I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way and just use good old hand drill. And now I'm just using a little bit of water and a piece of antler. There's some to do a burnishing of my edges, which is basically just using friction to sort of seal off the edges of your leather workpiece. I chose a black leather dye for this. I've already got 1 coat on it. I've done the outside once. So now I'm going to do the inside and all the exposed pieces. I'll end up probably doing 3 coats on this just to make sure I get a good deep black. I don't want any of the leather showing through. At this point, I've applied 3 coats of the black leather dye. I've applied 2 coats of a satin leather finish, and then also 2 coats of a leather conditioner. I really like the finish that puts on the leather piece. It's not too shiny, but it's also not too dull as well. The last step that I'm going to be doing here is applying the edge coat, which is a sealer. It's basically a paint that you put on the edges of your workpiece to just seal off the edges for good, and it also creates just a good border. Looks really good when you've got an antique finish. You don't really see it too much when it's a black leather dye, but it's a really critical step to long-term maintaining a piece that's going to last you over the long haul. Here we have the finished piece, which you can see it's got a really good sheen to it as compared to the original. Just definitely an upgraded look, just something that customizes the piece a lot. Here's what it looks like when it's actually on the axe. Everything fit perfectly. I appreciate you guys for tuning in. Like and subscribe.